After Putin reported on the successful testing of the new underwater drone Poseidon, the Kremlin's chief blogger, Medvedev, also woke up. On his social media page, the former Russian president decided to praise Poseidon. He first insulted the head of the Belgian Ministry of Defense, then wrote that, unlike the Burevestnik, the Poseidon could be called a doomsday weapon. Medvedev echoed Putin's praise for the successful test of the Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater drone. One social media user decided to leave a comment under Medvedev's post, suggesting testing the Poseidon in Belgium. Then Belgium will disappear. The deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council responded curtly, "That's the whole idea, sir." Medvedev's interlocutor replied, "The Poseidon project is nothing new. It's a modern take on the Soviet T-15 project. At the time, the Kremlin planned to create a powerful torpedo to attack the US coast in the event of war. They were attempting to create a modern submarine to support this torpedo." Putin first mentioned the Poseidon in 2018 during his address to the Federal Assembly. By January 2023, Russian media reported the production of the first set of Poseidon torpedoes for the Belgorod submarine. And recently, a war criminal reported a successful test of the Poseidon. Recently, Belgium threatened to wipe Moscow off the face of the earth if the Kremlin decided to attack Brussels. Belgian Defense Minister Theo Franken told De Morgan that if Russia ever decides to attack Brussels, the alliance's response will be immediate and devastating. If Putin strikes the capital of Belgium, he strikes the heart of NATO, and we will raze Moscow to the ground. This is perhaps one of the harshest statements ever made by a Western European leader. Franken emphasized that Western countries should not fear the Kremlin because threats only work on those who yield to them. The Russian embassy in Belgium has already called the minister's statement provocative and irresponsible. However, Franken himself doubts Putin would risk attacking Brussels, as it would be a direct attack on the entire North Atlantic Alliance. Military analysts remind us that NATO's military potential far exceeds Russia's. After 2 years of war against Ukraine, the professional portion of the Russian army has been virtually destroyed, with thousands of tanks and armored vehicles lost. Russia no longer has sufficient equipment even to transport ammunition. Horses and donkeys are increasingly being used at the front. Against this backdrop, the threat to raze Moscow to the ground sounds less like a figure of speech and more like a military technical fact. NATO countries truly have all the capabilities to do this, from high-precision missiles to strategic aviation and nuclear forces. Franken also noted that he is most concerned about Russia's hybrid actions, destabilization, provocations, and incitement on the alliance's eastern borders. The little green men in Estonia who are inciting the Russian-speaking minority against the Nazi regime. Before you know it, they'll annex part of Estonia, he said. A long-anticipated triple strike against Russia has finally landed, with the EU, the UK, and the United States having had enough of the Russian stalling tactics. This marks the most unified Western action since the start of the full-scale war, and the last straw for Eastern allies who are now cutting ties with Russia one by one. The turning point came when the United States abruptly cancelled the planned high-level summit in Hungary between Presidents Trump and Putin, discussed in a phone call between the two leaders earlier. Euromaidan Press media outlet reports, after Russia maintained its position of no ceasefire, that Ukraine should give up all claimed lands, should receive no security guarantees, while stating it would take some time to organize a delegation, the American side called the talks fruitless, given Russia's behavior before they even started. The consequences came swiftly as the United States finally lifted the restriction on Western-supplied missiles for deeper attacks, paving the way for the devastating Storm Shadow strike on the Bryansk chemical plant, carried out with American intelligence coordination. Then the United States, the UK and the EU unveiled synchronized sanctions, the largest package since 2022 targeting Russia's energy and financial arteries. Russia's energy sector, already battered by Ukrainian drone and missile strikes, has been reduced from a global exporter to a struggling importer. The new sanctions deliver the final blow, as India announced a complete suspension of state imports to comply with US measures, while private refiners did the same, as the country negotiates a trade deal with the United States that would lower tariffs on Indian exports in exchange for cutting Russian oil, Euromaidan Press says. Meanwhile, China's state energy giants halted new seaborne Russian crude purchases within hours of the sanctions announcement, fearing secondary penalties for them as well. This effectively isolates Russia from its two biggest buyers and economic lifelines, which combined hold an over 85% share of Russian crude exports. In 2022, oil and gas brought $130 billion into the Russian federal budget. By 2023, that number had collapsed by nearly 20% to around $109 billion. Even with temporary stabilization in 2024, cumulative losses exceeded $100 billion due to price discounts for India and China, who took advantage of Russia's weakened market position. As of mid-2025, monthly oil tax receipts were down another 28% year on year. Now, sanctioned Rosneft and Lukoil accounted for half of Russia's 10.6 million barrels per day output and nearly a third of all federal tax revenue, Euromaidan Press claims. Analysts estimate that with the new sanctions and the withdrawal of India and China, Russia could lose an additional $70 to $120 billion annually, equal to almost 6% of its gross domestic product. The deeper problem is that Rosneft and Lukoil subsidiaries are embedded across rail, port, logistics, and petrochemical industries, employing millions and underpinning regional economies across Russia. Sanctions on their parent firms endanger almost every aspect of the Russian economy, and as a result, its exports. Meaning the sanctions on only two of Russia's main oil companies threatens the entire transport, manufacturing, and stability of local and international Russian trade, Euromaidan Press says. Economists warn of a potential additional 5 to 10% GDP contraction of around $200 billion if these disruptions persist in the coming winter. For Russia, time is running out, and Putin may insist he will not act under pressure, but with energy giants crippled, allies retreating, and sanctions closing every door, the pressure is now total and inescapable.